Hello, human geographers. We are back at it again this evening. Tonight, we are going to be examining some of the major elements related to the diffusion of language and religion. And as has been the case before, we cannot talk about where certain languages are spoken or religions are practiced without looking at where they began. These areas are known as cultural hearths, or the place of origin of a major culture. Notice that many of the hearths of culture are also the hearths of agriculture and urbanization. That is because agricultural surpluses allowed a sedentary lifestyle and increased population density. This in turn allowed for labor specialization and a social hierarchy to develop. And in many of these early civilizations, we see the emergence of culture, specifically religion and language. For example, notice the region known as Mesopotamia. We see that this was also an area where major religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam emerged, and two major language families, Indo-European and Afro-Asiatic, have their origins in this region as well. Other cultural hearths include the Indus River Valley of South Asia, northern China, the Nile River Valley, Southeast Asia, West Africa, and Mesoamerica in the Andean highlands. Now that we've reviewed where major cultural groups began, let's take a look at some of their components that affected their patterns of diffusion. We begin with how languages are classified. This is important because their classification represents their history of diffusion. For example, a language family is the largest grouping based on a common history. So Indo-European languages, the largest language family in the world, all have a common ancestor. This can actually be seen in the term for mother, which is very similar in English, Spanish, Polish, Greek, Farsi, Sinhalese, just to name a few, all languages within the Indo-European language family. These languages then diffuse and separate and become distinctly different subfamilies, sometimes called branches or groups. These subfamilies then have their own distinct languages. For example, within the Germanic subfamily, languages include German and Dutch, but also English, while Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Italian are all part of the Romance subfamily. They all share a common ancestor, Indo-European, but have since separated into distinctly different subfamilies and languages. Then, within each language, there are different regional variations called dialects. A dialect is a local or regional characteristic of a language. While accent refers to the pronunciation differences of a standard language, a dialect, in addition to pronunciation variation, have distinctive grammar and vocabulary. The variations within a dialect are significant enough that most speakers can notice them, but small enough that speakers can still mutually understand one another. Our example here of a dialect is the Midland Northern dialect, but there are many dialects within English. Because of that, I like to visualize the language classification system like an hourglass. So maybe draw that into your notes. The language family is the biggest. The language subfamilies diffuse and separate, representing smaller groups of languages. Then we get to one specific language, which would be our pinch point of our hourglass. But within a specific language, there may be multiple or even many different dialects and regional variations of language. So our hourglass expands out again. Now let's shift gears and discuss some of our major world religions. Let's start with a few terms regarding how religions are classified, because that will then allow us to talk about how they diffuse. You may be familiar with these first two terms, but let's make sure that everyone knows them. A monotheistic religion is the doctrine or belief of the existence of only one God. polytheistic religion, on the other hand, is belief in or worship of more than one god. So mono means one, poly means many, or at least more than one. All right, our next definitions are a little bit more specific to the AP Human Geography curriculum, and those are universalizing and ethnic religions. A universalizing religion is a religion that claims global truth and applicability, regardless of ethnicity or culture group, and seeks the conversion of all people via evangelism and missionary work. Universalizing religions actively seek converts and view their belief systems as universally appropriate and appealing, regardless of other culture traits. There are relatively few universalizing religions, yet they still represent more than half of the world's population, 58% in fact. An ethnic religion, on the other hand, is a religion with a relatively concentrated spatial distribution, whose principles are likely to be based on the physical characteristics of the particular location in which its adherents are concentrated. Ethnic religions do not actively seek converts. Membership in ethnic religions is usually conferred by birth and historically have not actively sought converts. So only about 26% of the world's population identifies with an ethnic religion. Now, let's look at some examples. We have the 6 major world religions that you are expected to know for the AP Human Geography exam. If they ask you questions about other religions, they'll provide you with some background knowledge to properly answer the question. But for these 6, let's identify if they are monotheistic or polytheistic. In your notes, let's abbreviate that with an M or a P. And then let's identify if they're universalizing or ethnic. We'll use U and E. Here we go. We start with Buddhism, which is tricky to start out with because it's definitely universalizing. But let's not label it as monotheistic or polytheistic. It evolved out of Hinduism, which is a polytheistic religion. But Buddhists seek to achieve enlightenment and become one with Buddha, but don't necessarily worship Buddha as a god. Christianity, pretty easy. It's monotheistic with only one god, and it's universalizing as it seeks converts and followers all over the world. Hinduism is an ethnic religion, but there was a period when Hinduism did spread into Southeast Asia before the spread of Buddhism and Islam into that region. But 97% of the world's Hindus live near the hearth of the religion without the active pursuit of converts. And most Western academics will define Hinduism as a polytheistic religion. So that's what we'll say. There is an argument that all the gods in Hinduism are manifestations of a singular god, Brahman. But since the different gods are the focus of worship and prayer, we'll use that as evidence that Hinduism is a polytheistic religion. Islam, again, is pretty straightforward. It's universalizing and monotheistic. Judaism is an ethnic religion clustered near the hearth in Southwest Asia. It is a monotheistic religion. In fact, it's the oldest monotheistic religion. And Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have a common history descending from Abraham. So they're sometimes referred to as the Abrahamic religions. Sikhism is a universalizing religion, even though it does have a relatively concentrated spatial distribution, and it is also monotheistic. This classification system helps us to understand how a religion acquires adherents or followers, and at what scale. Ethnic religions like Judaism and Hinduism tend to focus in a more concentrated area, while universalizing religions like Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam tend to have more followers spread across a much larger geographic area. The last part of this conversation is about the impacts of the diffusion of language and religion. As languages diffuse, we can see differences in standard language, or day-to-day language, and official language. Official language is a governmentally designated language of instruction, of government, of the courts, and other official public and private communication. So, as languages diffused around the world, especially when driven by colonialism, we see official languages that are remnants of that colonial past. So many countries in West Africa use French as an official language, the language of government, while countries in Latin America use Spanish or Portuguese as their official languages. There are many countries, particularly multinational countries, that have multiple official languages, like Zimbabwe or South Africa. Others, like the United States, have no official language. Our standard language is represented on this map, English, but it's important to note that about 15% of Americans speak a language other than English. And since we have a federal system, 31 US states have designated English as the official language of their state. Within religion, there are certain specific patterns of movement associated with the diffusion of religion. A pilgrimage is voluntary travel by an adherent to a sacred site to pay respects or participate in a ritual at the site. And a sacred site is location with special significance to a religious group. These sites are often natural features or religious structures directly connected with a deity or associated with significant events in the history of a particular religion. Sacred sites in universalizing religions tend to be associated with the founder's life. For example, sacred sites might include the place that Jesus was born, the place where Buddha achieved enlightenment, or where Muhammad ascended to heaven. In ethnic religions, sacred sites tend to be associated with the physical geography of the earth. The Ganges River in India, particularly at Varanasi, is especially sacred for Hindus. And perhaps the best example of a pilgrimage, voluntary travel to a sacred site, is the Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Every year, over 2 million Muslims from around the world will travel to Mecca, which is the most sacred site in Islam, to participate in rituals connected to the life and experience of the Prophet Muhammad. But other pilgrimages occur to sacred sites in Jerusalem for Christians, Muslims, and Jews, just as a couple of examples. And we'll continue to examine the details from this lecture when we return to class. Have a good evening, everyone.